We've told ourselves a comforting story about Ice Age cave art for over a century. The paintings were spiritual tributes to animals, hunters honoring their prey with majestic horses, anatomically perfect bison, and mammoths captured in charcoal and ochre. The artists were in awe of nature, painting what they respected and depended on. Travel deep enough into these same caves, past the famous galleries, down shafts that require ropes and risk your life to reach, and you find images that demolish that story. Crude human figures, spears driven through torsos, bodies falling backward in death. The same hands that painted those sublime animals also painted murder. The Franco-Cantabrian region, southwestern France and northern Spain, contains the densest concentration of Paleolithic cave art on Earth. Lascaux, Altamira, Chauvet. These names carry weight in archaeology, representing humanity's first great artistic flourishing between 33,000 and 12,000 years ago. The prevailing interpretation has always centered on animals. Early theories proposed hunting magic, rituals to ensure successful kills. Later scholars emphasized spiritual relationships between hunter and prey, or totemic connections between clans and specific animals. The art was about reverence, about understanding the natural world, about humanity's place in a landscape dominated by megafauna. This view shaped how we see our Ice Age ancestors. They were hunter-gatherers, yes, but fundamentally peaceful, cooperative, living in harmony with nature out of necessity. The noble savage myth, dressed in mammoth fur and carrying atlatls. The art seemed to confirm this. Hundreds of caves, thousands of animal images, horses, bison, ibex, aurochs, mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, cave lions, reindeer. These artists understood anatomy. They captured movement, weight, and musculature. They used the natural contours of cave walls to give their subjects a three-dimensional presence. Human figures, by contrast, barely appear. When they do, they're rendered as schematic outlines, stick figures without detail or personality. This absence was interpreted as humility. Humans weren't worthy of the same careful attention given to animals. That interpretation breaks down when you examine what those figures are actually doing. Archaeologists call it the wounded man motif, l'homme blessé in French. It appears across multiple caves, separated by thousands of years, yet maintaining consistent features. The human form is always simplified, a vertical line for the torso, lines extending for arms and legs, a circle or oval for the head. No facial features, no clothing, no individual characteristics. These aren't portraits of specific people, they're symbols, archetypes. The defining feature is projectiles. Lines, sometimes one, often several, strike the body. These aren't decorative elements or abstract marks. Their angle, their placement, their relationship to the figure make their meaning clear. These are spears, darts thrown from an atlatl, weapons. The figures appear in postures that suggest death or extreme distress. Some fall backward, arms flung out. Others lie horizontally, already on the ground. Many of these figures show male anatomy in an aroused state. This detail appears too consistently to be coincidental. Interpretations vary. Some researchers propose it represents a muscular spasm at the moment of death. Others see symbolic connections between death and life force, or fertility and mortality intertwined. In shamanic contexts, it might indicate potency during trance states. The wounded humans are never depicted alone. They share the walls with animals, often large, powerful ones. Sometimes the animal is also wounded. This juxtaposition forces questions about relationships. Are these connected deaths, parallel fates, symbolic pairings? The placement matters. These images don't appear in the main galleries where the famous animal art lives. They're found deep in cave systems, in chambers that require dangerous climbs or descents. Accessing them would have been deliberate, difficult, and possibly life-threatening. This isn't casual decoration. This is ritual space. Lascaux is celebrated for its Hall of the Bulls, a vast chamber where aurochs thunder across the ceiling in ochre and black. Tourists stood in long queues until the cave was closed to protect the paintings. Replicas now serve the public. The real cave is sealed. The most mysterious scene at Lascaux sits at the bottom of a shaft that drops 16 feet straight down into darkness. Reaching it today requires a ladder. In the Paleolithic, it would have required rope, manufactured from plant fibers or animal sinew. Someone had to descend first, in complete darkness, not knowing what lay below. Someone else managed the rope from above. A fall onto the stone floor could break bones or kill. The shaft's acoustics add to its strangeness. Sound echoes and distorts in confined vertical spaces. In torchlight, shadows move unpredictably. Every sensory cue signals this wasn't ordinary space. At the bottom, a bison stands at the center, powerfully rendered in naturalistic style. Its musculature is precise. Its weight distribution is correct. But its belly is torn open. Entrails spill from a wound. To the left lies a human figure. The contrast in artistic style is jarring. While the bison is anatomically precise, the human is a crude stick figure. Vertical line for body, horizontal lines for arms, 2 lines for legs, simple circle for the head. The figure tilts backward, falling. The posture unmistakably suggests violent death. What appears to be a spear thrower, an atlatl, lies across the figure's body or beside it. Below the figure sits a staff or wand with a bird form at the top. The bird is carved or painted with enough detail to be recognizable. To the far left, a woolly rhinoceros walks away. Its tail is raised. Its body faces left, departing. No wound marks it. Its relationship to the bison and humans is unclear. The scene raises questions it doesn't answer. Did the bison kill the man? The animal is dying, guts spilling, but the man falls backward, away from it. If the bison killed him, the body should be close to the animal, beneath the hooves or horns. Are their deaths connected, or are they parallel images placed together for symbolic reasons? Why is the rhinoceros leaving? The bird staff carries weight. In shamanic traditions across continents, birds serve as psychopomps, spirit guides that conduct souls to the afterlife. A shaman in trance might transform into a bird or be accompanied by one during spiritual journeys. If the scene depicts shamanic trance rather than literal death, the bird staff becomes a ritual object. The falling figure undergoes spiritual transformation rather than physical death. But the bison complicates this reading. Its wound is rendered too clearly to be purely symbolic. The shaft itself, the 16-foot descent, the darkness, the acoustic strangeness, creates liminal space, a threshold between ordinary and sacred reality. The physical danger of accessing it mirrors the depicted danger in the painting. To see this image required risk. That risk was preparation, putting viewers in the right frame of mind. The scene wasn't meant to be seen casually. It was meant to be experienced after effort and fear. The image and the journey to reach it were inseparable. 4 major theories attempt to explain these images. Each illuminates different aspects. None succeeds completely. The shamanic interpretation draws on documented hunter-gatherer societies where shamans enter trance states to communicate with animal spirits, diagnose illness, or guide souls to the afterlife. The trance is often described as a form of death where the spirit leaves the body. This theory explains features that other theories struggle with. Bird symbolism makes sense. Birds guide souls between worlds. Deep cave placement fits. Darkness and sensory deprivation facilitate altered states. The aroused male anatomy might indicate spiritual power rather than death spasms. The projectiles represent spiritual energy, not physical weapons. The falling posture represents the soul's departure. The weakness, it relies on comparing modern practices to 20,000-year-old images. Paleolithic societies might have thought differently. The mythological interpretation treats these scenes as illustrated stories. The Lascaux shaft scene has a narrative structure, distinct characters arranged in a composition that suggests relationship and sequence. This could be a creation myth about the first hunt, or a cautionary tale about a hunter killed by his prey. This explains the repetition across caves. Powerful stories spread through contact between groups. Each community paints its version in its sacred space. It also explains why humans are schematic while animals are realistic. In myths, human characters represent types, not individuals. The weakness, If these are myths, multi-figure compositions should be more common. Most cave art shows isolated animals. The historical record interpretation is direct. These depict actual deaths. Hunting large game was dangerous. A wounded bison could charge and gore. The schematic style universalizes the event, turning personal tragedy into a collective warning. Skeletal remains support this. Sunghir, Jebel Sahaba, the Neanderthal wounds all prove violent death was real. The weakness? This can't fully explain the bird symbolism or why the motif repeats across caves separated by thousands of years. Individual accidents wouldn't create such consistent patterns. The didactic warning theory proposes education. Young hunters needed to understand the dangers. In a society without writing, vivid images served as lessons. The deep cave placement fits initiation rituals, young men confronting these images in darkness before their first hunt. The weakness: why hide warning imagery in inaccessible caves? Educational content should be easily visible. The shamanic interpretation has the strongest explanatory power. It accounts for bird symbolism, deep placement, aroused anatomy, and ritual context. But it doesn't exclude the others. A shamanic vision could be based on real hunting accidents. A myth could be reenacted through ritual. The ambiguity might be intentional. These images work on multiple levels: documentation and symbol, history and myth, warning and vision. The sophistication lies in creating images that contain multiple meanings simultaneously. The art doesn't exist in isolation. To understand if these violent depictions reflect reality, we turn to the human fossil record. For decades, scholars believed pre-agricultural societies were largely peaceful. Violence was thought to be a byproduct of settled life, property ownership, and social hierarchy. Hunter-gatherers, living in small bands with few possessions, supposedly had nothing to fight over. Human remains have demolished this view. Jebel Sahaba in Sudan, dated to approximately 13,400 years ago, contains a cemetery with at least 59 individuals. Of these, 24 show clear signs of violent death. Stone projectile points are embedded in bones. Some skeletons have multiple wounds. The injuries span men, women, and children. This wasn't a single skirmish. The remains point to sustained conflict over time. Sunghir in Russia, dated to around 34,000 years ago, includes an adult male burial where the first thoracic vertebra shows trauma consistent with a projectile strike from the front. Shanidar III, a Neanderthal from Iraq, dated to approximately 50,000 years ago, bears a rib wound consistent with a stone-tipped spear. The bone shows signs of healing, meaning he survived for some time after the attack. Saint-Césaire in France, dated to around 36,000 years ago, yielded a Neanderthal skull with a healed fracture on the cranium, inflicted by a sharp-edged tool. The individual survived a blow to the head. The world in which cave artists lived was one where violent death at the hands of another human was a real possibility. The projectile technology they developed for hunting, atlatls, spears, darts, could be turned against other people. The cave art wasn't pure fantasy, it was rooted in lived experience. The representational paradox sits at the heart of this mystery. Artists who rendered animals with photographic precision reduced humans to crude outlines. This wasn't an inability, it was a deliberate choice. At Lascaux, the contrast is impossible to ignore. The bison in the shaft scene shows individual muscle groups. You can see where the shoulder connects to the leg, how the weight distributes through the body, and the way the spine curves. The belly wound is anatomically positioned. The intestines spill from the correct location. Someone observed bison closely, understood their bodies intimately, and translated that knowledge into pigment on stone. The human is a stick figure: vertical line, horizontal lines, circle, done. At other sites, human bodies occasionally appear with anatomical detail. Carved figurines show breasts, hips, and musculature. When Paleolithic artists wanted to depict human forms with attention to shape, they could. They chose not to in the wounded man's scenes. At Pech Merle, dated to around 25,000 years ago, a schematic human figure appears integrated into the natural contours of the cave wall. The figure is positioned so that a rock bulge forms part of the body. This technique, using natural features as part of the composition, demonstrates spatial sophistication. The human itself is reduced to basic geometry: a torso, limbs, a head. Multiple spear lines pierce it. These aren't positioned randomly. They strike the torso at angles that suggest entry from different directions. If this depicts actual violence, multiple attackers struck the victim, or one attacker struck repeatedly. At Cougnac, also dated to around 25,000 years ago, at least 3 separate depictions of speared humanoids appear within a single deep chamber. The same chamber contains images of megaloceros, giant deer with antlers spanning 12 feet, and ibex. One figure has 3 spears embedded in its torso. These are clearly depicted as projectiles with points and shafts. The placement is anatomically informed. They strike the center mass where vital organs sit. Another figure has 7 lines radiating from its core. 7 spears exceed any realistic attack scenario. The number might carry symbolic weight, or it might simply represent intensity, a visual method for communicating destruction. The repetition matters most. The schematic style across all these sites creates universal symbols rather than individual portraits. A photorealistic drawing shows one specific person who died in one specific way. A stick figure shows anyone, everyone. The lack of detail makes every viewer see themselves in the image. Artists understood the difference between representation and symbol. They knew how artistic style controls meaning. When they wanted viewers to see a specific animal, this bison, this mammoth, they drew realistically. When they wanted viewers to see a universal human, any person, all people, they drew schematically. A photorealistic portrait would individualize trauma. The stick figure universalizes it. The crudeness transforms specific events into a collective truth about what it means to be mortal, to be capable of being killed, to live in a world where violence from animals or other humans remains possible. The choice to render humans this way, consistently, across thousands of years and multiple sites, shows conscious artistic strategy. These weren't primitive attempts at drawing humans. These were deliberate abstractions serving a specific purpose, turning individual deaths into symbols that spoke to everyone who saw them about the fundamental vulnerability of being human in the Ice Age world. These images represent a cognitive milestone. They're among the earliest visual records of humans grappling with their own mortality through external representation. To draw a wounded man requires conceptualizing death as an abstract category. It requires the ability to imagine yourself in that position. It requires a theory of mind, understanding that others have internal experiences like your own. Creating symbols for death means you've developed a framework for understanding it. You're not just reacting when it occurs. You're thinking about it in advance, ritualizing it, trying to control it through representation. The placement in deep caves matters here. These weren't public monuments. They weren't declarations meant for enemies or warnings posted at territorial boundaries. They were hidden in the most inaccessible parts of ritual spaces. Reaching them required dangerous journeys, descending into darkness, navigating narrow passages, climbing down shafts, entering chambers where sound behaves strangely and shadows dance in torchlight. The bird symbolism reinforces this. If birds represented soul guides, then depicting them alongside dying humans suggests a belief system that included afterlife concepts, spiritual realms, and the possibility of transformation beyond physical death. This is abstract thought at a level we usually associate with much later periods. We find it in Ice Age caves, painted by people who left no written language, no cities, no monuments that survived above ground. The majestic bison and horses show us what their world looked like. The crude, broken, speared human figures show us what it felt like to be conscious in that world, aware of danger from animals and from other humans, yet capable of turning that awareness into art, into ritual, into meaning. The violent imagery in Ice Age caves reveals something we've tried to ignore about our own origins: the capacity for violence, the consciousness of mortality, the fear of death. These aren't modern inventions. They've been part of us since we first had the cognitive tools to contemplate them. The artists who descended into those dark shafts 20,000 years ago were grappling with the same existential questions we face today. The stick figures pierced by spears aren't primitive scribbles. They're sophisticated abstractions, deliberate choices to turn individual deaths into universal truths. These people understood something fundamental. To represent death is to begin to understand it. To externalize fear onto a cave wall is to gain some measure of control over it. We've spent a century celebrating the beautiful animals in these caves while overlooking the humans. The bison and horses show technical mastery. The dying humans show something more important, the birth of abstract thought about mortality itself. So here's the strange comfort in all this darkness. Our ancestors weren't naive innocents living in peaceful harmony with nature. They were us, afraid of death, capable of violence, aware of their own fragility. And instead of being paralyzed by that knowledge, they went deep into the earth and made art about it. The darkness in those caves isn't what makes us human. The willingness to descend into it is.